Hello, it's Paul Driscoll here, aka The Drisk, and after a long hiatus I thought I would pick up my best games of a letter arcade edition. And I've been playing around with video editors, so hopefully this will be a lot more interesting for you in this new style. Now before we begin, actually I want to give a little shout out to our sister channel of RGDS podcast. Now this is a retro gaming audio podcast that I do, and we thought recently we would actually set up a RGDS YouTube channel and put lots of footage and things, and I'll be uploading these on there as well. I've already put tons of content, so I would love if you consider subscribing to that system. It's all for a bit of fun. I mean, we always switch off the monetary side of things. We're not interested in that. It's just about giving extra things to our listeners. And if you've never discovered our podcast, I would love, just look for RGDS podcast and have a listen. Again, all totally free. Just a bit of daft fun for us, really. Anyway, let's go on to the video itself. So for the video is the best of a letter arcade edition, and for this I do it for bigger systems with thousands and thousands of games, and it's really difficult to sort of hone in on what sort of games you'll be, might be interested in playing. So the way I hit on it is I do 5 games per letter of the alphabet. And I go by the imagining, what would I choose if all other games would disappear and I could only choose 5? So I'm not choosing things that are historically important or seen the best by the majority. This is a personal list of what games today I enjoy the most. It's really a great way, for me to discover games as well, because I'll play every game of that letter, or at least try to, that I have access to. And obviously I'll give many honourable mentions at the end as well. And really the purpose of these videos is a bit of fun, and it's an excuse to sort of flag these great arcade games, many people might not know of, or it might be ones that you did know and forgot in the eons of time. Or ones, well-known gems, but it might rekindle you to play them. And really the whole purpose of these videos is to just, like next time you're looking at your fully loaded emulation list, you'll, or platform of choice, you'll be looking through, and maybe, some of the games I highlight here might jump out at you, and you'll give them a try. And if you do, and I'd love, put a note in the comments. It means a lot, to know that there's people out there listening and enjoying to my little hobby of doing videos and podcasts. Anyway, let's go on to my choices. So I'm going to go from 5th to 1st, and then we'll go into the honourable mentions. So for my 5th choice, I've chosen Quiz and Dragons. Now this is by Capcom, and thankfully it's one of the few Western translated quiz games that are so popular in Japan. It was released in 1992, and it's a brilliant Dungeons & Dragons licensed game using their beat-em-up art style. They did the 2 Capcom beat-em-ups like Shadow of Mysteria, but they've used it in a quiz game, which is quite unique really. And it's the same idea. You're defeating monsters, but you're answering questions as you make your way through the quest. There's loads here. There's 4 warrior heroes to choose from, and a multitude of beasties and monsters to defeat. It really makes it a huge amount of fun, even though the questions are quite geared towards American audiences and not the wider English-speaking world. So expect questions on things like baseball that you're definitely going to have to guess. Well, certainly for me, I have to guess them. Still, it's beautifully presented, and I really, really enjoy this. And thankfully, it's quite easy to play this today, because it's on the Capcom Collection Volume 2 in the Xbox and PS2 era, which is actually the version you're seeing here. Now what's great about the Xbox and PS2 Capcom Collection version, there's also a variant of the game that does Quiz and Dragons, but instead of asking you general questions, it asks you questions on Capcom history. I mean, how cool is that for fellow retro heads like me? So I can't recommend it highly enough, and it's definitely a great place to put it on my 5th choice. Right, okay, let's go on to my 4th choice. And I've chosen for my number 4th choice the really little known bat and ball game Questa. Now, it's made by Namco and the legendary creator of Pac-Man, Toru Iwatani, and it was released in 1987. Now, sadly, it's a game that passed many gamers by, but due to its very limited release and overshadowed by also the 1986 hit Arkanoid, of course, which of course this game is a response to. Now, for the most part, it's a straight clone of Arkanoid, but there is some slow down and speed up blocks, and there's nice little touches here and there, which for me really elevates it. There's lots of cool ideas, which of course came in the Arkanoid sequel, like the B power-up, where it will duplicate lots of balls every time it hits something, giving you a multi-ball extravaganza. But the other thing I really like about it is that there's a nice range of levels here, and each one's designed by a Namco game designer. So it actually tells you when you go on to the level of whom designed the level, and it's just a really nice touch knowing that this was designed by, you know, Toru Iwatani or someone else from many of the Namco games of this era. And I mean, the biggest takeaway from me is all the Namco designers are all sadistic gits, because this is such a tough bat and ball game, with it really speeding up far too quickly and some really, really tough levels. But if you're looking for a challenge and you're looking for something a bit different from Arkanoid and the common ones that you discover, this is one well worth sticking on. And, you know, maybe, you know, put some main cheats on, so it at least gives you infinite life, so you get to see a little bit of the game. It's a lot of fun either way. Right, okay, let's go on to my 3rd choice, and I've chosen the 1981 Taito game Kicks 2 Tournament Edition, released by Taito in 1981. Now, this came out as the same year as the original Kicks game, and on the face of it, there's very little difference between the two. Essentially, it's like the first game, where you control and draw boxes avoiding the enemies, and what's known as the sparks, which is that sort of enemy in the middle that bounces around. It's a real nice risk and reward, where you sort of like draw boxes and you must complete the boxes before you get hit by any of the monsters. You are vulnerable while you're drawing, and it's really nice because the amount of times just through greed you draw too big a box, because it's too tempting to sort of rush it and try and get a large chunk of the play area drawn. So I have a lot of fun with this. Now, the difference with the tournament edition is, I don't know, there's a few enhancements really. It's not really a sequel as such. It's a bit like Afterburner 2 in that it's just life improvement enhancements. You get extra lives if you draw 90% of the playing area, which is a nice touch. Gives you a reason to go above the standard threshold of what you have to achieve. It looks slightly prettier than the original game, a bit more colours and things. But to be honest, that's it. But there's enough little enhancements that made me choose Kicks 2 over the original Kicks. Now, it was made by the original husband and wife, Randy and Sandy Pfeiffer, and it's an impressive hit for Taito because it spawned many sequels, and there's been many imitators since its release, and many good ones on the Saturn and various arcade ones. And I've always been drawn to this game. You know, I love its central risk and reward mechanic of drawing the boxes and its originality. It's probably the fact that I'm terrible at the game that it doesn't make it higher up my list here, but I do enjoy it, and going back to it was a real pleasure. Right, okay, let's go on for my second choice. And for that, I've chosen the orange swearing snouty one, of course, Qbert, released by the pinball maestros of Gottlieb. Now, basically they decided in 1982 they would enter the video game world, and they created this lovable little scamp, which, you know, I think is such a great character. Now, it's difficult to play Qbert in the home because it's on the arcade original. We have a diagonally placed stick of the arcade, which makes a lot of sense. So when you pull the stick, it's in the right direction for the sort of 3D playing field that you're jumping on. Where, of course, in the home, down is actually diagonal down. So I strongly, suggest that you tilt whatever controller you're using in that diagonal position to make it a lot easier to play. And, as I say, the concept, I think everybody knows. You have like a MS Escher style pyramid, and the idea is you have to colour all the blocks on the 3D map whilst avoiding the enemies. It's tougher than it sounds. There's certain beasties such as the sunglass-wearing Slick and his buddy Sam, who will change the colours back after you've changed them, so you have to do them again. Also, it's easy to accidentally jump off the cube the wrong way and plunge to your doom. But then, I love, when you do that, hearing Qbert and his rather colourful language as he swears in his garbled tongue, but you're no doubt that he's swearing. And I love how this swearing came about. Daniel Thiel, who was in charge of the sound of the game, he was using sound chips. He was trying to make it in Qbert say actual words, but he just couldn't do it. It didn't sound human enough, really. You couldn't really understand what Qbert was saying. So in pure frustration, he just typed out anything and got Qbert to say, and it was just so funny what Qbert, when it tried to say this random set of words, that he thought, actually, this is really cool, and they decided to say, well, he's swearing, isn't he, because he's died. And they sort of finished it off with that little speech bubble that appears over his head, with all sort of like asterisks and symbols to leave you in no doubt that Qbert is indeed swearing. And I'm pretty sure that this is the first ever swearing in a video game, even though it's not necessarily in English or understandable language, but I still think it counts. Anyway, going into this video, I would have originally said I'm not that much of a fan, but going to Arcade Club and playing it on the real hardware, I really quite enjoy it. You get quite addicted, and I've been playing it on main since, and as long as you slant that joystick, it becomes very good. You get better as time goes on, and it's well worthy of your time. I'd strongly recommend it, and that's why it's my second choice. Right, okay, let's go on to my first choice, and I've gone for a real favourite of mine. It's of course Quartet 2. This was released by Sega in 1986, and it lets you play up to 4 players. And the idea is you can control 4 characters. There's Lee, Joe, Mary, or Edgar, and you grab a jetpack and fly around the level, shoot all the enemies. And the whole idea is you find the boss, or the end character. He's not really a big boss character, it just takes a few more hits, and he's holding the key. You grab the key, go through the door, and then you go on to the next level. Now, Quartet 2, again, this is not really a big sequel, slightly more colours and things like that. The big reason I chose Quartet 2 over Quartet 1 is because, well, the big thing, the first one had this beautiful 4-player cabinet. It is a beautiful arcade cabinet. It's a real sight to behold. But the sequel was more of a conversion kit. And what's great with that is you get to actually not be locked to the player for each joystick. So for example, at the beginning you can actually choose on one joystick who you're going to play, and each time you die you can switch characters. So in the home, Quartet 2 is probably a better one to play. Now the game was made by Ryoko Kodama of Sega and Ninja or Ninja Princess fame. Of course, she went on to do things like Fantasy Star games and Sonic the Hedgehog. I mean, she's a real powerhouse of any game developers, let alone female developers. But she really is quite special, and it's a real loss, her passing. I think it was a couple of years ago she sadly passed away. But she shows here again, as she showed throughout her career, the great design and choices that she did with the game. The characters are all memorable, and also you've got to note the fantastic music by Katashira Hayashi, who would go on to do the brilliant Galaxy Force 2 arcade music as well. Now, all in all, this is a great fun game, and it's worthy of your time, and honestly, going back to it, it's always a pleasure. And the arcade version, while the Master System is a great port, you can't beat the arcade original, so play it if you can. So they were my personal 5 top choices, and I would love to hear in the comments below what you would have chosen. But just to give you some ideas, I wanted to give you some other games, some other honourable mentions. Now there is of course Quantum. Now this was a really weird, interesting vector one where you basically you would draw shapes. So you have a trackball. They've actually got it in Arcade Club in Blackpool. It's wonderful to play on. And but even playing it at home with a mouse on MAME or something, it's still, you get a general idea. Although it's a little bit easier with the mouse, I have to say. But the idea is you basically draw the loop, and a bit like kicks, you have to complete the loop before they hit the line that you're drawing. If you hit the line, it breaks. But the idea is you have to loop them all together. You get extra points if you loop multiple of the enemies together. And that's it really. It sounds very simple, but it does get very, very difficult as you go on. But I certainly highly recommend the game Quantum. Another honourable mention is Quake Arcade. Now technically Quake Arcade Tournament Edition, released in 1998, this really only made the prototype stage, so it didn't seem right to include it. It's a really strange idea. I can certainly understand why only 20 cabinets were made, because I can't imagine gamers being too into this game, especially with what the PCs could do at the time. But the general idea is they've taken pretty much the pure Quake game. They've made a few tweaks to it. It's got some extra weapons of Quake 2 thrown into it. But the big thing is that when you shoot certain enemies, it drops like coin bonuses, and you pick them up. And I think the general idea, well, it certainly goes to score, but I think the general idea, you would get actual tickets out of the machine that you could take in, to get an eraser or whatever you wanted, as you used to do with many of the other games. And I suppose it was a really interesting idea. Lasertron was the company that did this, and it was a bit of an ill-fated idea, and certainly didn't take off. But their concept was that they would take popular PC games at the time and put them in arcade cabinets. And of course they made certain tweaks to the game to make it a shorter playthrough. Now the Quake prototype is much more focused on deathmatch to the original PC games, and those gift bags that I mentioned, and things like that. I mean, it's really sort of cool. It's difficult to play today. I mean, you have to jump through so many hoops to get the game working. It certainly doesn't work with MAME or anything like that. But it's interesting to see. But you can't beat the original PC game, and it seems a little bit pointless, but a nice oddity. I would certainly like if id Software just as a little curio, would sort of also remaster this as they did with Quake recently. Another honourable mention is Quack. This is not to be confused with Atari's 1974 duck shooter, Quack, with an exclamation point. No, this is instead another interesting 1982 prototype, again by Atari, just called Quack, Q-U-A-K. It's a sliding block puzzle game that has you make a safe path for Mummy Duck and her baby ducklings. It's a very charming and enjoyable puzzle game. It's just a shame that it didn't make it to any of the home consoles, because I think it would have sat much better there than in the arcades of the time. Another one that I heartily recommend is Quarth. There's a good version of this on the Game Boy. Now, Quarth is also known as Block Hole. Basically a Konami puzzle game released in 1989, and the idea is you fire blocks to fill the shapes, to clean, so you draw a rectangle through firing the blocks and then it will disappear. So it's kind of mixing in Tetris with Space Invaders, really. It's a lot of fun, and it's an interesting one. I certainly quite enjoy it, particularly on the Game Boy original. I think it's a great port. Then, of course, there's Qbert Cubes, which is the sequel to Qbert. Now, the idea of the game is that you jump around diamond formation. I find the game interesting, but a little confusing, really. I mean, you've got, I don't know, what have you got? There's turtles to slow down time. The biggest problem is it's more like a Rubik's Cube. Depending on how you jump is how it turns, and I get totally confused. And what I end up doing is jumping round like a loon until it says I completed the level, which I know is not the way to play it. But I think it's worthy. It's just I'm probably too thick to play it, if I'm honest. But anyway, they're all the ones that I would suggest as honourable mentions for the letter Q. I mean, there are other ones out there, but please, in the comments, tell us what you would choose, and also don't forget to check, as I mentioned at the top end of this video, the RGDS podcast YouTube channel. It's very new. There's not many people on there yet at the moment, if I'm honest, but I think there's really interesting stuff there, including I did a massive tour and a lot of video when I went to Arcade Club the last time, so you can see it in all its situ. I'll put in the show notes how to sign up, and also, if you're so inclined, please check out our audio podcast, the RGDS podcast. It stands for the Retro Gaming Discussion Show. We'll talk about all things retro gaming. But I think it's we do it all for free. It doesn't cost anything. We don't do Patreon or anything like that. It's just purely from the heart and passion that me and fellow retro gamers like myself share, and we do it all in our own time, just for people to enjoy. So if you haven't tried our audio podcast, or as I say, the new YouTube, please, give us a listen, because that's really all we do it for, is just to hopefully make people's days brighter. Anyway, so until next time, keep it retro.